Chapter 8 really goes into sampling, and it's really important to understand how the samples are gathered when you're critiquing research and examining research to include in your evidence-based practice. So we're going to go through this relatively quickly, and sampling really involves those decisions about who is really going to be in the study and who should and should not be included and how many should be included. And that includes, if you're looking at a very broad picture, a very focused picture, depending on the population or the area of focus. So when we're looking at probability, it's really looking at the likelihood that an event or a condition will occur. So we can look at probability in terms of chance or in percentages. And when we move on to looking at the level of significance, it's really to look at the difference as far as what will be accepted as being attributed to chance, because there are those outliers, and the levels that are set by the researcher at the outset of the study. So we're looking at that foundational design as far as looking at the sampling based on if there's that possibility of chance, are really looking at how the study was structured and if the sample is appropriate to that particular area of focus or study. So when we're looking at probability samples, we're looking at those to ensure that every subject has an equal chance of being included, and it's really important to look at those samples to make sure that we aren't choosing folks that will get the outcome that we want. And that's a really important factor to look at when you are critiquing the articles. So when we're looking at those probability samples, you want to look at the total numbers, how it will be assessed, screened, how they're selected, and inclusion and exclusion criteria. So that's key elements to look at as far as how is the sample determined, and having very clear inclusion and exclusion criteria is very important as well, so that as a reader you're very clear of the sample and what variables were removed possibly by defining that exclusion criteria. So when we're looking at random selection, we're looking at all the possible participants and that we're giving equal chance. That's what the random is, equal chance of everyone being selected, or individuals being selected have the same amount of chance. So we infuse bias when we give a greater probability, so to speak, as far as choosing our sample. So we want to make sure that we look at the whole population and randomly poll people from that population so that everyone has the same chance of being part of the area of study. So there are variations. So that's the stratified, the cluster, and the multi-stage. So we look at a stratified group like different sections. So identifying folks from different stratums is one way to do sampling, and cluster is a sample of groups rather than individuals, and multi-stage involves that sample of multiple sets of clusters. So when we're looking at non-probability sampling, and there are reasons for that because very often randomized is very expensive and there's limited resources when developing samples. So that's one of the key factors to look at, and it's really very broad when we're looking at trying to identify all the potential subjects, and maybe not all the potential subjects are available to us to do our studies. So some of the reasons are the limited number of subjects, Sometimes our subjects are difficult to find or difficult to connect with for studies, and this is really important because those who do research really need to reflect on the fact that studies don't include those folks who aren't participating, and those who aren't participating may be those who are of higher risk, so to speak, difficult to reach in vulnerable populations, those types of things. So always key into that when you're reading. Sometimes folks just don't complete a study, especially when we're looking at longitudinal studies, as we spoke about earlier. So there are different types of non-probability sampling, and that's quota sampling, convenience sampling, which is very often used, enrolling those who are available. And very often when we do our studies in a particular organization, it's a convenience sample. And then Snowball really works on the concept of referral sampling, so starting with some individuals and ask them to refer others. So that's one way to also do non-probability sampling. So this is just a flow design as far as consort sampling. So this is something to kind of take a look at and examine, and the same holds true when we're looking at eligibility, when we're looking at sampling as well. So we also want to examine the types of errors that do occur in quantitative research, and errors do occur again when we're critiquing. We need to look at those types of errors. They're kind of categorized into two types. Type 1 being when a null hypothesis that is true is rejected, and type 2 is when we fail to reject a false null hypothesis. So in looking at, when we're looking at our samples, we want to do a power analysis using an effect size, and we referred back to that when we talked about longitudinal studies. So this is the power of a statistical test that is probability, test is the probability that will yield a statistically significant result. And an underpowered study is when the sample is too small and actually can lead to that type 2 error. And an overpowered study is what can lead to that type 1 error when a sample is too large. So kind of keep that in mind when you're looking at the types of errors and when you're doing your critiques. So power analysis using that effect size, again, we're looking at the magnitude of the phenomena, and we're looking at an effect size calculation that indicates the strength of the relationship between the independent and dependent variables. So there are always variables, and some are independent and some are dependent. So this is just kind of the formula for that, so to speak. It's not like you have to memorize this, but just know that this exists. And also when we're looking at effect size, again, if the null hypothesis is not true, then the effect size will be greater than 0. This is something to kind of key into when you're reading. And the larger the effect size, the greater the degree to which the phenomena is shown. So again, when you're reading your articles, you may want to take notes on this. This will help you as you're reading your different research subjects as you're doing your critiques. So when we're looking at purposeful sampling, the sample for qualitative studies is called purposeful because it's directed by that particular purpose of the study, not by statistics. So the quantitative sampling is based on the statistical calculations. Purposeful sampling is for devising a sample that will provide insight into a particular topic. So when we're looking at sampling for qualitative designs, again, we're going back to case studies. It may be one or more individuals that are studied. And then we're also looking at selecting a particular culture or subculture, an ethnic group of interest. Begin with a large group and then kind of narrow that down. So when we're doing qualitative design, it's very labor intensive in doing the analysis process. So it's really important that the group that you sample is representative of the area of focus, the culture, the subculture, those types of things. And when we're defining the different types of sampling in qualitative design, we're looking at selecting subjects who experience a phenomena, and that's when we're looking at phenomenology, and I'm stumbling over my words, but we're looking at a particular experience. And then grounded theory involves selecting those subjects based on their ability to contribute to an evolving theory, and very often grounded sampling for qualitative design based in grounded theory really has to do with developing different components, whether it be mid-range theory, those types of things, when we're doing nursing research. So when we're looking at different types of strategies, we're looking at different criteria, stratified, homogeneous, the same type of studies or samplings. And then also we want to, when we're doing qualitative design as well, sometimes the sampling is used to the point of saturation, meaning we have the answers that we need. We also may focus on a particular scope, a variation, or a verification. Again, with qualitative, we're looking at examining that phenomena that is so critical. And when we're looking at sampling with a purpose, we may, again, back to those case studies, looking at single or multiple cases. For focus groups, usually 8 to 12 is very appropriate for focus groups. Again, we have to make sure that the data is manageable, and it's very labor intensive when one analyzes qualitative studies. So we're looking at redundancy or that saturation as well. So if you have any questions or concerns about the materials covered in this chapter, please let me know.